Hey, it's #1 best-selling author and motivational speaker, Equalman. Most of you know me as Equalman. I'm super excited for today's 7 super tips with the Shark Tank's one and only Barbara Corcoran. Barbara teaches us how to take a negative moment, specifically around a bad boyfriend, and turning it into motivation. So without further ado, please enjoy our latest 7 super tips with Barbara Corcoran.
One of the best jobs I had was as a waitress at the Fort Lee Diner, which was a fancy town on top of our house, so we met really fancy people there. And I was one of the counter waitresses competing with the waitress at the next counter and getting very few male customers sitting at my counter because she had enormous breasts and she had a gimmick that the guys loved. She would balance 2 coffee cups in each hand, that's 4, and 2 more on each breast, and she would hip her way through the doors. And so every guy in town wanted her counter rather than my counter. But fortunately for me, my mom had told me to compete, I should braid up my long blonde hair and put red ribbons to match my little red turtleneck, and that's exactly what I did. And lucky for me, the night I did it was the night that Ramon Simone walked in and asked Nick, the manager, if he could sit at my counter. And that was my first lucky break because he offered me a ride home and became my boyfriend and moved me to New York City and paid for a whole week at the Barbizon Hotel for Women, and I never went back again to New Jersey. Ray loaned me $1,000 to start my business. He took 51% of the stock. After all, he was the financial partner, he explained, and I was the working partner, and I took 49%, and I started a small rental brokerage company in New York City, and that was the beginning of Corcoran Simone, my first business. That business I built for 7 years with Ramon, and it was going so well. We had 14 salespeople. I had moved in with him by then, much to my parents' dismay. I was disowned from the family. They're very religious and very proper in every way. And then his children moved in with me right after I moved. I didn't even know he had children for 2 years. So I was the mom of 3, which was comfortable. I was used to minding kids, certainly. And that's when Ramon Simone came home almost 7 years to the day and announced to me that he was going to marry my secretary. I just couldn't believe it. I thought it was some idea of a bad joke. Only the day before, I loved Tina, the secretary, who was really secretary, both of us. And within that split second, I hated her like I had never hated anyone before. He told me to take my time moving out. I took about a minute, grabbed a toothbrush, and was out of that house. And I moved in with my best friend in New York City onto her sofa. And that was the beginning of, I think for me, probably a depression, because I had a very hard time getting up in the morning. And why I took it so hard, I think, was because I was in love with Ray. I couldn't believe that my secretary had been sleeping with him. It seemed mind-boggling to me. And I had loved his children. I had done their homework, cooked their dinners. They were my family by this point. And I just knew that anything I had become was totally a result of what Ray had seen in me. He had found me in my little town, took me right out of the diner, loaned me the money to start the business, and I couldn't imagine living life without him. And so we continued the business for probably 2 years, every day dragging myself into that office. I wanted to fire Tina because it was so impossible, I felt, to work with her. But of course I couldn't because he was the majority partner. And so I continued that for 2 years until one day, I can't even remember what woke me up. I just woke up one morning and thought, I don't want to do this anymore. And so I puffed up my chest and marched right in and told him, we're going to end this partnership and this is how we're going to do it. And I divided the business just like a football draw. He picked the first person, I picked the second. We had 14, we cut them in half. And I moved out of that office late that afternoon with half my money, which was about $12,000. We had $24,000 together. And I marched my salespeople out of that office on a Friday afternoon, and by Monday I had found another office. In those days, you could rent a phone and actually have them delivered the next day. And then all I had to do was go downtown and buy some cheap metal desks, get them in the space, and we were back in business. That was the beginning of the Corcoran Group, which became the business that made me very rich. And right before I left the office and leaving Ray and Tina, and I remember it was like being in a movie, like slow motion, like I'm out of here. And Ray said, you know, Barbara, you'll never succeed without me. And thank God he said that to me, because I knew he had just handed me an insurance policy to succeed for the rest of my life. because every time I thought of failing, or every time my back was against the wall, and every single real estate recession where I was out of money, out of luck, and thinking I was going down, I would just think of those words and a miracle would happen. I would think of one more idea to try to stay in business. And without those words, I think I would have given up many, many times. And that's what kept me on the straight and narrow, pushing ahead, because I couldn't stand the thought that he would watch me fail. Amazing how these negative things really play out in life, but that's how it played out for me. Well, of course, 20 years later, I did succeed without him, and I sold my business for $66 million cash. And you know what? Things worked out for him too, because he married Tina, had 3 more children with her, and he's still married. And from the looks of it, what I saw about 5 years ago at my book party, he looked like he was happier than I was with my husband, Bill. So go figure. Everybody got what they wanted and everybody won, but that's the way it goes.
How do you view rejection, and how can you help other entrepreneurs view it in maybe a different light?
Let me tell you, rejection is the big kahuna in all entrepreneurship. Okay, show me somebody who could take a hit, and I'll show you a good entrepreneur. I don't know if I made that up, but I think I did. But it's all in how well you get back up. And you know what I have found, by the way? Because if you think about it, great salespeople make a couple $1 million a year selling apartments in New York City, which my great salespeople do. Great entrepreneurs. All the business comes from them. They manage their own business. They hire staff. They're entrepreneurs. And you know what I found is the only difference between the superstars making the millions a year and the person's barely getting by? The only difference, not contacts, not how hard they work. Some people work just as hard and don't make any money, right? It's how long they feel sorry for themselves once they get hit. Right? Some people could take a hit and milk it for 2 weeks. They're at their desks, they look like they're working, but they're not working. Mentally, they're not there. The great salespeople take the hit and then they jump right back up as though they've been hurt just as much as the next guy, but they work right through it and keep going. Let me tell you, if you have that skill, you should be an entrepreneur because you will be paid well for it. The single best thing I do, more than anything else I can do in building businesses for myself and these other people, well, just speaking for myself, is I fail well. If I fall on my face, let me tell you, nobody's better at pretending I'm not, thinking of a quick cover-up, trying to keep moving. And you want to know, in that act itself of getting back up fast, you always stumble onto something good. And you want to know one other thing. I'm not a religious person because I was raised so goddamn religious. I don't want to ever think about it again. But I do believe once you put your mind on going forward on anything, there's almost like a battle cry that goes out in the universe and the world rallies around you. You're right. It just comes to your fore again and again. So to have that kind of good faith that I'm just getting back up, even if I'm going to get slammed, life is fair in its own weird way, in that way, in building businesses. You will be swept up by some lucky chance. It happened to me every time I got back.
I just wanted to know what advice you would have for somebody who's trying to start off.
Yeah, well, the first thing you should do is go and work for a top salesperson. Best way to go in. The easiest job to get in New York if you want to go in real estate is to go to a rental company. It's like the bottom feeders right there. It's terrible, but you know what's great about it? And I ran a rental company for 8 years before I went into sales, thank God. And you know what's great about it? You get 100 times at bat. In other words, you answer 50 calls. Is that apartment available? Is that apartment available? Different when you're selling. It's a slow motion. So you get a lot of practicing. If you could work as a free slave even for a licensed top salesperson, just sitting next to them being their slave or servant, you're going to learn everything. You can't learn in a real estate school. You got to be on the street and learn it. And so that's the most important thing.
No, look at all of the people who get their real estate license. They sign up, it's going to be easy, I'm going to sell some houses, get a commission, what have you.
You know
why, how did you go and build this business?
Because I already knew at that point when I was 23 that I had 22 jobs and I failed at quite a few of them. I already knew that I was a lousy student and somehow managed to survive. And I already knew that I, more than any other broker out there, was great at taking a hit and taking rejection. And what's the essence of all real estate brokerage or any sales position? It's not how well you sell or talk, it's It's really how well you can take a hit and how long you take to feel sorry for yourself.
Now, when you take the hit and you come back from it, are you feeling the hit?
Of course you
You
feel a
are.
hit.
So there's not, you can get knocked back. That's
No, no.
not the problem.
Let me tell you, the most passionate people feel the hit the hardest. They feel the hit the hardest because they cared more than the next guy. And you want to know? I have to tell you, my top salespeople at the Corcoran Group were earning $7-8 million a year when my average income for a typical salesperson was $48,000-50,000. And I'm telling you, it didn't come down to contacts. It didn't come down even to how hard they worked. My worst workers very often worked the hardest. It came down to something to prove and getting back up. I'm telling you, that's it.
Something to prove is the difference between $40,000 to $50,000 and $7 to $8 million a year.
Insecurity is a wonderful motivator. I find on the Shark Tank, when I can unravel something in an entrepreneur where that person's been injured, never had good guidance, everybody said this about them, that about them, they had their shot and they took control of their own universe and they were going to prove that they could do something. Nothing's better than that. Competitive. If I tell Jim from Cousins Maine Lobster, I don't have his picture here, but you know I talked about him before. If I tell him one little thing about the guy he used to compete with on the hockey team, Jim was a semi-professional hockey player and had some injury or something in the minor leagues, if I'm telling that right. But anyway, his arch enemy on the other team was a guy named Luke. What do you think happened? Luke's from Maine, Jim's from Maine, Luke went into the lobster business. All I have to do to double sales is say, hey, did you hear Luke open another restaurant? Talk about competitive spirit, he's ready to kill. He doesn't stop working. He hates the idea that somebody might beat him at a game. It's his DNA, and his partner Sabin's the same way. All I have to do is tell Grace and Lace, who makes beautiful lacy socks and shawls in my most successful business by far in terms of making money. And what do I have to do to get them going? Hardly anything. All I have to do is say, God, got a big check from Cousins today. But you know, I'll get a check from her like within the week. A bigger check. They're winning? We're more successful. Why? I didn't say compete with my other. That's the way they're wired, competitive. You get an entrepreneur who doesn't feel the heat of competition, he's not going to be good on his feet. She's not going to come to the fore when she really needs it. That competitive spirit drives you through all the things that don't make any common sense in life. That's what it does, okay?
True, because I read that you got like D's in school, which
Don't stop. They could have been
I'm
Fs.
sorry,
I begged for half those D's. Don't knock it.
but which is so crazy because you would never, I mean, most people probably would never know that, but you took, you know, this small sum of money, you turned it into your business empire, you know, this huge real estate empire. How did you, you know, keep that motivation? Like what would be your advice to someone like that?
Let me tell you, my advice to anyone, including the parents of the anyones, is don't judge a kid so early. You know, we live in a world where kids are judged by how well they could read or write, and I couldn't do that till I was in 7th grade. Think about that. So I was written off. But let me tell you what happens when you're the dunce in school. You have 8 hours a day or 6 hours, whatever your school length is, to sit around and daydream. And if you don't think daydreaming and fantasizing and having like crazy thoughts have a lot to do with building a business, it's everything. So if you get overeducated, you know what? You know how to do it, but you don't have the gumption to do it because you're not a loser who has to prove something in the world. The best thing that ever happened to me is not be a good student, because I've been spending my whole life proving I'm not stupid. And so I'm always looking for that same entrepreneur. And you know what? The great majority of my most successful entrepreneurs, except for one, were all terrible at school. So don't write people off so quick, and certainly don't spend a lot of money on that Harvard MBA thinking that means you're going to be successful. The upside when you're getting much older, and I've gotten stronger and stronger in this way as by the year, by the minute, okay, and I wish I knew it earlier, is to be yourself. Because people, even if you're weird, a weirdo is often the most loved person in a team. I think if you could be yourself in all that it is, what typically happens is people like you because they can sense it's a real deal. It's the airs, the phoniness, the trying to impress, the insecurity, all the stuff that we all strive so hard for when we're young that gets in the way.
This is Equalman wrapping things up for today's 7 super tips with the one and only Shark Tank's Barbara Corcoran. And I hope you got out of as much as I do. If you do, then subscribe below. Remember, these 7 super tips are us trying to find the best and the brightest out there. And a lot of times I've been blessed to meet these people in person just because of my public speaking career. And it's people that have motivated me, and I hope in turn they're going to motivate you. If you have any suggestions on who we should focus on next, please leave it in the comments below. And remember, we're all about trying to find your inner superpower and unleash it on the world. So until next time, remember, it's not what we take from the world, it's what we leave behind. Now, it's nice to see that I'm not the one that makes mistakes. I make 99% of them, but occasionally Mr. Driscoll makes one. Okay, ready? From the top. With the Shark Tank's one and only Barbara Corcoran. What'd I say? Corcoran? Could I just say Corcoran? Man, I have a tough time with the Shark Tank names, man. Just give me Damon John all day. What am I saying? Oh,
Shark Tank's one and only.
with the Shark Tanks. Corcoran. With the, okay.